good evening and welcome. I'm Sarah McDougall. I'm Director of Ben-Uri and Curator of the current exhibition Sheer Verve, and I'm delighted to be joined by an old friend to this series, Dr. Una Richmond, who is our fantastic academic advisor to the exhibition, which is all about the Women's International Art Club, on which she is the expert. And we're here today with a distinguished panel of experts to discuss the representation of women artists in public collections, both historically and today. And just before I introduce them, the usual housekeeping notes to remind you that the event is being recorded, so please keep your cameras and your volume off throughout the speakers' presentations to lessen any possible interference. So we're delighted to have with us Harriet Loeffler, Curator of the Women's Art Collection at Murray Edwards College at the University of Cambridge. The largest collection of its kind in Europe, it comprises over 600 works and is on display across Murray Edwards College. Harriet's recently curated exhibitions include the touring exhibitions Maud Salter, Centre of the Frame, which toured to Touchstones Rochdale, and just opened A Spirit Inside, a collaboration with the Ingram Collection at the Lightbox in Woking. And with Harriet is Sasha Llewellyn. Sasha is founder of RAW, Rediscovering Art by Women, an educational platform which encompasses a 20th century surrealist art collection by women and promotes research into voices that have been silenced, both in the 20th century and today. Through sponsorship, research, exhibitions, and the collection, RAW is helping to shape a new generation of radical and inclusive academics, artists, and gallerists. Unfortunately, our third guest, Dr. Nina Perlman, can't be with us this evening. Nina is head of UCL Art Collections and leads the Curating Equality Research Hub there. And she's also a senior researcher with the Sloan Lab, which is developing new technologies to open up the contents of museums and collections to make them more intuitive and relevant to the way that they're used by the public and academics. So the format of this evening's event is that Harriet and then Sasha will each speak for about 10 minutes with a PowerPoint about their own collections. And then I will stand in with a very short text on behalf of Nina. And then Una will kick us off for the discussion with a few questions. And we hope that there'll be a lively discussion afterwards and that you'll all pitch in with your own questions. We'll fit in as many as we can. I know Harriet has to be off promptly at 7:30, so we must be very efficient, but we'll fit in as many as we can. So do type them into the chat throughout the event. And just before I hand over to Harriet, I was just going to explain a little for anyone who is new to this series and perhaps doesn't know so much about Ben-Uri and or about our current exhibition, Sheer Verve, which is really a snapshot exhibition looking at the best of the Women's International Art Club, which was founded in Paris and ran from 1898 to 1978, having its first exhibition in London at the Grafton Galleries and then going on to survive and thrive through 8 decades of extraordinary change in the arts and socially for women, of course, as well. Ben-Uri is represented in the exhibition by half of the exhibits. We have works by 39 different women artists on display, and 20 of them are from the Ben-Uri collection. The Ben-Uri collection was founded Ben-Uri was founded in 1915 by a Russian Jewish immigrant, Lasse Berson. The collection was initiated in 1918, and today we have works representing 3 generations of refugees and immigrants to Britain. So beginning with our Eastern European founders pre the First World War, then much affected by the so-called Hitler emigre generation, predominantly Jewish, but not exclusively so, who came between 1933 and 45. And finally, since 2002, we've widened the remit to include post-war immigration from all nationalities and ethnicities, but reflecting that wider refugee and immigrant experience to Britain. So enough from me. I'm going to hand over now for the first of our speakers this evening, Harriet, and to her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay. It's been a while since I've done one of these. So can you all see that? I'm hoping. I'm looking at Sasha for a nod. Yeah, it's fantastic. Great. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much to Sarah for inviting me to talk about the Women's Art Collection. I only recently visited the Ben-Uri and found it astonishing, particularly this exhibition. So I'd urge all of you to make the trip to the venue to see the extraordinary exhibition and the work on display. It really is brilliant and well worth the journey. So I have been the curator of the Women's Art Collection for almost 5 years. I'm also aware that I should be timing myself because I am, 43. Yeah, so I've been the curator for almost 5 years, and I feel hugely kind of privileged in my role. It's a collection that is evolving and growing and kind of continues to teach me things about the boundless creativity of women, and also how much more there is still to do to kind of raise the profile of the collection, to make it better known, but also to showcase the extraordinary work that we have in the collection. So in my talk, I will share how the collection started, how it has evolved, and how I kind of attempt to care for and curate and develop a collection that now contains over 600 artworks by 399 artists. So before I take you through the history of the collection and some of the key works within it, I would really like to just sort of linger on this really important work by an artist called Rose Garrard. Okay, so this beautiful, remarkable work by Rose Garrard, I want to kind of linger on because I think it says something about visibility, invisibility, which I think is really relevant to the kind of the framework for tonight's discussion. So this is a work that was one of the first works to be donated to the collection when it was founded in 92. And Rose Garrard works in a range of mediums, from sculpture to performance to kind of sound. And her work engages very directly with gender, status, and power. And in 1982, she visited Nottingham Castle's exhibition titled The Women's Art Show, 1550 to 1970. And this landmark exhibition brought together the work of women artists across 400 years. And it was after her visit that Rose Garrard described feeling encircled by the work of women artists and having a feeling of having sort of found her place, a continuity that linked her work to an established lineage of women artists. But she didn't just feel in good company. She also felt kind of anger and rage at the institutional erasure of these artists across art history. This piece is called Madonna Cascade, and it's a triptych that appropriates artworks by historic women artists. This one features a self-portrait by Judith Leyster, and the other two artworks are by Artemisia Gentileschi and Elizabeth Viggy Lebrun. Alongside each of the works are objects that connect to the personal and the political. Here, a figurine of the Virgin Mary populates the frame. This was an object that was placed upon Garrard's bedside by her Catholic mother during her childhood. Garrard was also drawn to the Madonna figure, the Madonna, the kind of archetype, and the associations with femininity and kind of gender stereotypes. So in her installation, we see a self-portrait by the 17th century Dutch painter Judith Leyster that dates around 1630. Judith Leyster was an artist who had a successful career. She joined the Guild of St. Luke's in Haarlem and was one of a few professional women art painters of the Dutch Golden Age. Yet for 2 centuries following her death, her work was wrongly attributed to her male contemporaries, notably her husband and Frans Hals. The portrait is surrounded by a sculpted frame that literally falls to the floor. and its whiteness has been interpreted as symbolic of the erasure of women artists over time. This work, I think, attempts to correct this. It takes up space and demands attention. Garrard uses the frame in several of her works to symbolize both art and the boundaries kind of women have to break through in order to kind of literally take up space. And this work speaks to the history of women artists. Women we know have always been made art, but have been systematically excluded from the art establishment. And until the 20th century, art history in the main has been written by white men who tended to write about white men. So the women's art collection offers a counter to any idea of the canon in that women take center stage as opposed to being on the margins of art history. So what is the Women's Art Collection? It is a permanent collection of modern and contemporary art by women at Murray Edwards College, one of 2 colleges for women at the University of Cambridge. The collection is the largest of its kind in Europe and is displayed across a Grade 2 listed Brutalist building that was opened in 1964. I'm just going to jump ahead a bit here. This is quite a useful slide, but I will just jump back to that was opened in 1964, and we received museums accreditation in 2018 and are open to the public every day. It's worth saying that the collection is absolutely everywhere. 85% of it is on public display. So you will find it in the dining room, in the walkways, in staff offices, in the accommodation blocks. So wherever you are in college, you will almost certainly be in the company of work by women artists. And something I'm interested in is this idea of kind of curating a collection is very much about curating a building. So you have very interesting sight lines across this building. So even here, you can sort of see into the library. There's a work by Shani Rees-James, and similarly, you have work in this walkway. So there's lots of really interesting sight lines that I consider when placing artworks in particular parts of the building. But let's just jump back a bit to the start of the college, because it's useful to sort of have a wider context. And so I will just jump back if I can find that arrow. Here we go. So New Hall was founded in 1954 by Dame Rosemary Murray, the founding president, who established the college as New Hall. And her name, alongside that of the Edwards family, who generously endowed the college in 2008, now make up the newly named Murray Edwards College. And the Women's Art Collection recently was known as the New Hall Art Collection, but we actually reverted back to our original name as the Women's Art in order to better reflect what it is and what makes it unique. So when New Hall was founded, Cambridge University had the lowest proportion of female undergraduates of any university in the UK. There was 1 female student to 11 male students, which is perhaps unsurprising given the university only started issuing degrees to women in 1948, and it was the last university, one of the last universities to do so. So frustrated with the lack of opportunities for women to access first-rate degrees, a group of women campaigned to establish a college for women, and they faced huge resistance, but did make it happen. So the college opened to 13 students and 2 fellows in a small building in the city centre where Darwin College is now. And as its numbers increased, the building, a new building was conceived, which is located 5 minutes from Kettle's Yard. So anybody listening to this, if you haven't visited us, please do, because we're very close to Kettle's Yard and you can make it a great trip to combine it with Kettle's Yard. So Dame Rosemary Murray, I would argue, was absolutely inspired in her choice of architects, who were Chamberlain, Powell and Bonn, who went on to build the Barbican shortly after building this bespoke college for women. And they really did design this building as a manifesto for the education of women. So there is this sense of always kind of looking up and thereby aiming high. Initially in the architectural plans, there was a library. Gosh, I need to speed up. There was a library in the initial plans, there was a chapel, but that didn't happen for ideological and financial reasons. And so the library became this kind of sacred space. It has a feeling of an ecclesiastical space. So this idea is that worship should be made to learning. And so instead of an altar, there is a rising staircase. And that was kind of absolutely at the heart of the college and its architecture. And this is the iconic dome, which is the absolute kind of centerpiece of the architecture. And there is very much this sense of kind of looking up and thereby aiming high. Here we go. So to start with the sort of the collection and how it started. So in the 1980s, interestingly, there was a really important and significant series of residencies that happened across the Cambridge colleges that were sort of largely administered by Kettos Yard, who have an incredible archive on a lot of this work that's currently being researched at the moment. And Newhall, as it was known then, was were kind of keen to be part of this residency program. And so it was Valerie Pearl, who was a historian. Before she was president of the college, she was a historian at UCL, which is very important and significant if Nina Palmer was speaking, because actually she really knew about the Slade and its importance in terms of the education of women artists, in that it admitted women on equal terms to men since it was established in 1871. And Valerie Pearl really knew about that. So when she came to Newhall, she was very keen to work with the other colleges to have an artist in residence. And she was instrumental in appointing the American artist Mary Kelly as the first artist in residence at Newhall and at nearby Kettos Yard. This is in 1985 and 86. And by the time Kelly arrived in Cambridge, Postpartum Document had already achieved iconic status, being shown at the ICA, and that explores very much the mother and child relationship, which is informed by psychoanalysis and feminism, and focuses very much on the formative, her son's acquisition of language. So it was kind of a bold choice, really, I think, for the college to be working with Mary Kelly, who came and spoke about and has spoken about her time at the college and how interdisciplinary it was and how she was engaging with academics from all sorts of disciplines. And it was really kind of influential on her practice. And she went on to make a body of work called Extas, which are a series of photo laminates that is part of a much bigger series called Interim. And it really does explore themes to do with the history of women's lives, from the women's liberation movement in the 1970s, but then much broader about body and history and money and power. And so there was a kind of real cross organizational support for this to be acquired for the college. And that really began the kind of nucleus of the collection. And after then, an artist appeal happened in the early 90s, where artists were invited to donate work for this new collection. And the motivations were quite interesting. Looking back at the archive, they were really to kind of inspire the student body and also to be a kind of financial asset as well, which I think is quite interesting looking back. And it was a really interesting group of people, and the Bursa was very important in that. This is the work. I'm going to jump ahead a bit, but and so the artists on that list included Paula Rego, Maggie Hambling, but also early career artists Maud Salter, Lubena Hamid, whose work is here, were all donated work. And this was an incredible kind of act of collective generosity. And I think that what is so unique about this collection and is that so often collections are representative of an individual or a kind of a sort of a museum professional potentially, or a single individual to kind of amass and accumulate a collection to demonstrate wealth or status. Or whereas with this, it was absolutely born out of of artists. And so the initial list of 49, it grew very organically. So artists were then recommending other artists. So I think what makes it so unique is that it's an absolutely fascinating example of a network of artists. So Maud Salter recommended Lubena Hamid gave work. And whenever I take artists around the collection, they will always recognize somebody. That might be a tutor from art school, somebody who babysat their kid when had a job interview, whatever it is. Like, it's a very networked collection. It's it's very representative of a community, which I think is very important. And the artists were very much given a platform and a voice. And as Griselda Pollock highlighted in her opening address at the launch event in 1992, She wrote or said, "The artists have agreed to come together and through their vibrant and powerful works form a permanent sense of women being able to, form a permanent testimony to the very idea of a community of women. The artists and their work speak as much to each other as to us, the onlookers. Hanging here together, they provide not a dumb spectacle, but a model of conversation." And that's something that I return to and think about a lot when we're developing projects, thinking about collection displays. So I'm just going to fast forward 30 years, and the collection now has over 600 artworks. And so how do I curate this collection? Well, we put on 2 exhibitions a year, and we do lots of programming across the year, working in collaboration with the university, with the History of Art department, with partners all across the city and beyond. This is a photograph of the exhibition that was mentioned, the Centre of the Frame, which brought together the Zabat series that the Scottish Ghanaian photographer Maud Salter made, who was one of the kind of original artists to donate work, that then toured to Touchstone Rochdale. We also did a collaboration with Kettle's Yard on Linda Sterling's Bower of Bliss. So she had a big retrospective at Kettle's Yard in 2020, and we did a version of her Bower of Bliss, an incredible kind of dance collage performance in the Dome. And then more recently, I've worked with the Ingram Collection, which is a modern British collection of 20th century work. And we have curated together with Jo Baring an exhibition called A Spirit Inside that really takes a talismanic object, artwork by Dora Carrington as its starting point, to really consider objects that have a kind of literal interiority or have a kind of charge or currency in some way. And this is an installation image of that. I'm so sorry I've run over, but just to say that it's programs such as these and that, you know, in my work, and it is absolutely about creating kind of this sense of community, new dialogues, and also broadening our reach to reach kind of wider audiences in the work that we do, and sort of taking the collection outside of Cambridge. So this exhibition is the first time we've actually shown the collection on this scale outside of Cambridge. And so I hope to be kind of following further kind of collaborations such as this, which I think is so important and absolutely the heart of the collection, this sense of collaboration. Thanks so much.
So thank you, Sarah and Ben Uri. I was so happy to be at the opening of Sheer Verve, and I reiterate that it is just a fabulous, important exhibition like Ben Uri always put on, and would highly recommend that everybody makes the journey to go and see it. So thank you so much for inviting me here. Raw is only a year and a half old. I could say that it's been a huge adventure already, and I hope we've got lots of adventures to come. We are in the middle of, or rather at the end process of seeking a charitable foundation status, which should be forthcoming in the next few weeks, after which we can really accelerate with our vision for the future. As Sarah said, it's an educational platform which is promoting research into voices that have been excluded from the art historical narrative in the 20th century and beyond. It is an arts collection which is not exclusively but is centered on 20th century surrealism. We hope that through sponsorship, research and exhibitions, our collection will shape a new generation of much more inclusive artists, academics and gallerists and art historians. Raw Contemporary is the sister operation to Raw Modern, and that is run and curated by Mauji Mendel, whose amazing, inspiring and important vision has been so important for Raw, but also for me to see beyond the restrictive label of just women artists. Raw Contemporary will focus on 21st century artists with a special focus on the LGBTQIA+ community, and work that challenges preconceptions of heteronormative sexuality, and particularly the stigma that shapes sexual representations. Mauji runs a blog monthly in which artists are interviewed, And we're also working very closely with museums and institutions, including so far the Barbican, the National Portrait Gallery, Tate Britain, the Carolee Schneemann Foundation, to highlight current shows and provide a platform for discussion and research into today's topics. We've already commissioned a lot of essays by young students or recently graduated art historians, who we remunerate, and hope that this is also a good first platform that they can share their research. Alongside that, I'm continuing my own research that I've been carrying out over a 3-decade career, producing exhibitions, books, articles, etc. So the art collection, it's not nearly as big as the art collection we've just been hearing about, but we do have 60 works by over 35 different artists, paintings, drawings, design, collage, sculpture, and the collection is growing. And I just thought that, yes, first of all, I'd like to say that we don't have a physical space, and maybe that's something that we'll have in the future. But we are lending to museums at no cost, no loan costs, and providing images and copyright where we can, free of charge. This year alone, we have loaned 15 works to various museum collections, including Surrealisme Féminin at the Musée de Montmartre, that I think we were the biggest loaner with 12 works. And next year, with the centenary of Surrealism, we have works going all over the world, USA, Sweden, Switzerland, the Pompidou are borrowing works. So already we're very, very happy that the collection is getting visibility, because in the end, that's the most important thing, that these artists actually get the visibility that for so long they haven't had. So I just thought I'd run through a few highlights, although it was difficult picking them out because every work to us seems like a highlight. But this is Winifred Knight's Edge of Abruzzi boat with 3 people on a lake from 1924. And when I curated the Winifred Knight's exhibition at Dulwich Picture Gallery in 2016, it was the first exhibition and accompanying book that she had ever had. Since 1947, she'd been languishing in total obscurity. Her only reference in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography was as Thomas Monington's first wife. The exhibition was a huge success. Her work was loved by thousands of visitors, just as it was loved in her own lifetime. She was the first woman to win the Rome Scholarship in 1920 and was collected and heralded as one of the greatest British artists of her time. So this is a picture by very little known Irish British artist called Gladys Hines. And I will be publishing a book on Gladys Hines, again, her first book, in 2025 with Yale University Press. She was founder of Sinn Féin and very much implicated in the Irish revolutions, although her role has been completely obliterated. I will be publishing a 3-decade correspondence between her and Ezra Pound. She was a book illustrator, a painter, a sculptor, a vorticist, part of the Amiga workshops, but I think that probably hardly anyone will have heard her name. And this is one of 5 works that we have by the great Ethel Colquhoun, who finally is having an exhibition opening at Tate St Ives at the end of next year, traveling to Tate Britain and then touring into Europe. She is a wonderful surrealist artist, joined the Surrealist group in 1939, but was expelled in 1940 for her interest in the occult. And this is a very early work which she produced when she was still a Slade student, but I think you can already see her wonderfully subversive iconography. This is a female take on the biblical story of the Nativity, where the focus is on the woman who has a harrowing look, staring out, with Joseph pressing down on her arm and the baby just reduced to a few sausage-like abstract shapes. But that exhibition, I think, will finally put her firmly on the map as really one of the most important women surrealists to come out of Great Britain. So beyond Britain, another great artist, Mary Vassiliev. This is her Poupée from 1938. If she's known at all, it is probably, she was a Russian artist, sorry, who came to Paris in 1905 and stayed there for the rest of her life. If she's known at all, it's for the brilliant canteen that she set up in the First World War for impoverished artists, that was frequented by the likes of Picasso and Modigliani, etc. But her painting is very much focused on childhood, and this painting was produced 1938, just after André Breton had come back from a trip to Mexico and brought back with him these funerary objects, which are depicted in this picture. And this is a painting, not a surrealist, it's not exclusively surrealist, but an artist who is very close to my heart, which is Françoise Gillot. I was absolutely amazed to discover this picture about 3 years ago, and we purchased it, catalogued much later than it actually is, and also that the two children in it were her own children, whereas in fact they're models who she drew often, who were dancers. This highlights the total lack of visibility and research into Françoise Gillot, who died this year at 101. She never had a major retrospective in a public museum. Her work appears in very, very few public collections. The Pompidou only have one work that they purchased while she was still with Picasso, and another one that was donated. She's never had a proper exhibition in France, the country of her birth. This picture was produced a couple of months after she finally left Picasso, and I think it's just so wonderful in the way that she's standing so straight at her easel, painting, saying, "I'm okay. I've survived Picasso, and I'm an artist." But I wrote an article, which is the kind of research that we're doing with Raw for The Guardian, to plea for an exhibition. Finally, what a shame it didn't happen during her lifetime, but finally, hopefully there will be a retrospective in the coming years. And this is a little-known surrealist Belgian called Jane Graverol, the Sacré de Printemps, after Stravinsky's great ballet. I'm just showing this because it was also it was lent to the Surrealist exhibition at Montmartre and was produced as the cover of the exhibition catalogue. And she is one of two Belgian artists, along with Rachel Bass, who we have quite a few paintings of in the collection. And we will be lending them next year to the National Museum of Brussels for their centenary surrealist exhibition. This is an artist who I also adore, again, completely languishing in obscurity, Bona de Mondiag, an Italian surrealist. And in some ways, this is, she mixed collage and embroidery and painting, and she wrote poetry. And this, in a way, could almost be seen as a self-portrait, because she always identified herself with the snail, which for her symbolized androgyny, fragility, but also strength. And this, going later into the 20th century, is another artist who died quite recently in 2021, Mary Beth Edelson, who's a celebrated American artist, activist, and pioneer of the first generation feminist art movement. This photograph, which she painted over, is part of her iconic Woman Rising photography series, in which she took nude self-portraits while performing private spiritual rituals in remote and rugged landscapes, from forests in Maine to the dunes of North Carolina, Outer Banks, all the way to the volcanic landscape of Iceland. She then paint it and draw on the surface of the photography to make imagery of goddess archetypes, talisman, fantastical creatures, spiritual symbols. Laura, very happy as well to have just brought her archive, and that's something that we will be pursuing much more in the years to come, is trying to protect and purchase archival material from women artists. So finally, Aurora will be giving a prize every year so that a contemporary artist can have an exhibition and produce a photo book or a catalogue of their artwork. The first recipient of the Raw Prize and this year's recipient is Anna Sampson, and this work is called Tessa for Dada, which was for Dada magazine. Anna is a graduate from the Chelsea College of Art and UCL, and her work's motivated by her own life experience. She uses her art to forward social justice for those who are marginalised and oppressed, and particularly the LGBTQIA+ community and sex workers. And her work investigates the interplay of queerness, fetishism, performance, and sedition. And she focuses particularly on the visibility of beauty and the beauty of marginalised sexualities. Anna will be having, her book will be published next year, and she will be having a touring exhibition that will be sponsored by Raw next year as well. So I think I've probably gone over, but that just sums up a little bit of our activities, and watch this space. There's lots more to come.
Thank you very much, Sasha. I'm just going to get up Nina's PowerPoint. Can you all see that? I hope so. So as Nina is not here this evening, she's explained that not everything in the PowerPoint is going to be relevant to the text she's given me. So I'm just going to flick through a few of the images while I speak, and then we will conclude this part and go on to the questions. So that's a shot, obviously, of UCL, and you see the Slade highlighted there on the left. So UCL Art Museum is a valuable resource for exploring gender imbalance in the arts. Its Slade collections span 150 years and reflect the history of art education as the first art school to admit women on the same terms as men. Slade prizes were awarded from 1871 and retained from 1897. In the first year that prizes were awarded, 3 of the 5 winners were women, and women consistently won prizes at the Slade thereafter. The museum has helped restore reputations of artists lost in the gaps of history through ongoing research, loans, and exhibitions, working with cultural sector partners as well as students and academics. For instance, UCL Art Museum was the major lender to the first major retrospective of Winifred Knight's that we heard about just now from Sasha, which took place at Dulwich Picture Gallery in 2016. And it's also loaned work to the current exhibition of Gwen John, curated by Alicia Foster, which is currently on at Pallant House Gallery in Chichester. So curating equality projects have enabled UCL to establish that 45%, around 1,500 works of the museum's Slade collections of their holdings comprise work by women artists and connect contemporary artistic practice to research in other disciplines. So what can be learned from the UCL collections? These collections are a valuable resource for understanding currencies of esteem and the career paths of women artists of the past, and that which connects them with their contemporary counterparts. For example, interdisciplinarity, collaboration, education, social and political activism, and public engagement, all now at the forefront of contemporary art practice. And these are characterized in the careers of many 19th and 20th century women artists. and yet the contributions of so many of these artists remain invisible, having failed to be mapped along with their influence and legacies by the generations that followed them. Being able to consider the conditions that impacted the professional advancement of women artists, who demonstrably outperformed their male peers in art school when the playing field was level, sheds light on conditions that perpetuate gender imbalance in the arts today. And we see here on this slide, I think, yes, a work by Eleanor Mary Monsell, and I think another one from her in the next slide. And the prize-winning figure drawing that we see by her, she gained the first prize equal with William Orpen in 1898, would have been one of the first to enter the museum collection in 1898, while recent additions to the collection at UCL through the prize system and other methods include works by 21st century winning artists Sophie Bouvier Auslander, Yvonne Feng, Lily Johnson, Sophia Mitsola, Anya Olafogs, and Mariana Simnet. And these acquisitions sit alongside works by key 20th century figures such as Dora Carrington, Paula Rego, and Anna Maria Pacheco. So the UCL art collections offer a unique record of the theory and practice of art education at the Slade from 1897 to the present day. No other art school collected in this way. Unlike other public collections, the Slade collection was built up through the prize system, and thus the museum holds examples of work by artists before they began their professional careers and with no foreknowledge of their future position within the art world. Thank you. To stop the PowerPoint there, and we're going to ask Harriet to join us and also Una. And I think Una is going to kick us off with some questions. And I was just going to add to that, which I should have said when I spoke very briefly at the beginning about the Ben-Uri collection, that the official figure for the representation of women artists in collections is currently 7%. Ben-Uri has 29% women. Of course, we aspire to 50%. And UCL, as we've just heard, in a mixed collection is the single highest one at 45%. And then we have these wonderful women-only collections that Harriet and Sasha both represent. Una.
Hi. And just before I get into the questions, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about percentage representation of women in top public galleries. Dr. Kate McMillan of the Freedlands Foundation found in 2019 that the government art collection had a 14% of artists in their collection. The British Council collection and the Arts Council England both had 24%, but the National Gallery had 1% in their collection. And then fast forward to 2022, the Sunday Times reported that the National Gallery still had just 1% of women in the collection. National Galleries of Scotland was 2.8%, the National Portrait Gallery 11.1%, and across Tate's 4 galleries across the UK it was 13.1%. Although I've got to add that the recent Tate Britain rehang included 50% women artists, I believe. So I just, as representatives of women-only collections, Harriet and Sasha, I'm sure you are very aware of these stats, but how much outside of your organisations or your collections, how many initiatives do you think are being done to redress that balance? And is any of it effective, do you think?
Shall I shall I go? Just
Yeah.
because I have quite an interesting sort of case study, shall we say, where before I was working at the Women's Art Collection, I looked after the Modern and Contemporary Collection at Norwich Castle, which is like a local authority museum with a collection that was 300 years old. And my predecessor at the Women's Art Collection was a fantastic curator called Eliza Gluckman, who is now the director of the Government Art Collection, and who actually for a year only bought work by women artists in her role at the Government Art Collection, and is doing incredible work in terms of acquiring work by underrepresented groups. And so I came to the Women's Art Collection to an event that she organised with the Guerrilla Girls, and it was one of their amazing lectures. So Frida Kahlo, with her gorilla mask, was giving this very impassioned lecture about gender representation across the art world. And I was a curator at Norwich. So after that talk, I went and I did a survey of the collection in Norwich to discover the representation was 7%, which I think, looking at regional galleries, all of the ones that you've mentioned have all been kind of London based, or kind of whereas it's quite interesting to compare with regional galleries. But I think that was kind of an average, really, looking, because I was sort of monitoring it. But then after that, I did an exhibition called Visible Women, which was based on a book by Penny Slinger. We had a very early work in the collection by Penny Slinger, like a really incredible work. And it was based on her book, 50% Visible Women. And so we did this exhibition, and on the back of that, we received funding from Valeria Napoleoni, who's done a really important program to support regional collections with the Contemporary Art Society to acquire work by women artists. And I was successful in an application, and we acquired an incredible work by Lisa Niesenbaum of a female couple and their adopted children, which is now this kind of key work in an exhibition at the Fitzwilliam Museum called Real Families. So it's really wonderful to sort of see these works having a life. And so I think that there are some really interesting and impactful projects that are happening and that are about expanding collections and really making a change. And I think it's raising awareness, and I think people are changing their practice unquestionably. So for instance, the Towner in Eastbourne now will always do programming kind of 50-50. So they kind of are establishing quotas for themselves. And I think that's really important. And I think it's programs like Valeria Napoleoni's project and the Contemporary Art Society, and that it is definitely helping. I mean, I think there's a way to go, but I think that's a good case study. But very interested to hear what Sasha thinks.
I definitely think, like you, that there's reason for optimism, but certainly can't take our eye off the ball. Things are definitely moving in the last few years. There are efforts being made, certainly in curation. There's more books coming out about women artists. If you think that Abramovich is this year is the first woman to have is the first woman artist to have a retrospective in the main galleries of the Royal Academy. I mean, that's incredibly symbolic in its own right. Here in Paris, where I am, where I live, there's been a lot of initiatives the last few years, helped by an organisation also called Aware Archives of Women Artists. I've just seen the Sophie Calle exhibition, which is just mind-blowingly extraordinary, at the Picasso Museum. She's been asked to create an exhibition in conversation or in response to Picasso, and she's basically expelled him from his own museum because there's only 3 works by him and the rest have been confined to the basement. So these are all wonderful initiatives and incredibly symbolic as well. I think that there is still an urgency, there's still a danger that we celebrate the same women artists, and that also gives people the impression that there were only a handful of great women artists. In fact, there are so many artists that need bringing to the surface, and what I find continually is because they weren't appreciated in the past, that so often archives have been destroyed, artworks been lost or dispersed. So I think there is an urgency to try and reclaim the histories of a lot of women artists, not just a handful. But I think that there is definitely reason for optimism. I think, and the awareness compared to when I started working on this whole subject 30 years ago, is thanks to so many wonderful scholars and curators, is finally coming to the surface, and I think people are becoming much more aware.
I just wanted to add one thing to what you've said, Sasha. Interestingly, Jo Baring, who I co-curated the Spirit Inside exhibition with, she sort of counters the kind of publicity about Abramovich, that actually Elizabeth Frink had a retrospective in the galleries at the Royal Academy, but no one seems to be mentioning that. And actually, with all that's really interesting, that actually there was an artist who took over those galleries, maybe not quite to the same scale. And I can't, but I think that's really important to mention, that actually even in one's own institutional marketing, those archives and that institutional history can sometimes be patchy in terms of its knowledge.
Quite a few women, including Laura Knight in the 70s, had exhibitions at the Royal Academy. They seem to be saying that she's the first artist to have an exhibition in the main galleries, but right. I don't remember the Elizabeth Frink exhibition, so I can't comment on whether it was which galleries they were in.
Yeah. It's worth, yeah.
I'm just going to, because of timing, I'm just going to stop that point there, although I think there's one we could keep discussing. And we have a question here from Emily Fuggle in the chat, and she thanks you both for your wonderful collections and sharing them. She says, I wondered what the future of collecting looks like for these two collections. Are artists still referring one another as a community to make donations to the Women's Art Collection? And are there gaps that each collection would particularly like to focus on or fill?
It's a really good question, and I think it gets into the complex situation in terms of historically artists donated, and is that indeed the right thing for women artists for us to continue? So we don't have an acquisitions budget, but it's something that we are constantly discussing within the college and the collection of, actually, should we now be acquiring work? And we have established an acquisitions fund to acquire work by artists of colour, which we sort of fundraise. We identify things and then we sort of fundraise per work. So it's not an endowment as such. And that is because we want to redress an imbalance in the collection. There are absolutely gaps that I would love to fill, without question. So a number of the artists that were on the original list, and looking through the archive, for whatever reason, the invitation didn't reach them, but there are definitely gaps to fill.
Sasha?
So I would say, obviously we don't have donations in the Raw collection, and we have very limited funds, and in a way the collection reflects my own expertise, which is surrealism, and we will continue to collect around that. But of course, it will never be a survey exhibition, a survey collection, because of our limited means. But we just hope to make a difference within one kind of art movement of the 20th century to address that imbalance. We will be bringing much more forward the Raw Contemporary, and hoping to provide sponsorship not just for artists from all communities, but also for scholars.
Thank you. Una, did you? Oh, and there's thanks from Emily for those answers. Una, did you want to pose another question? I know we're going a little over time here, so I hope everyone, including Harriet, can stay with us for a few minutes longer. It seems a shame to lose our two wonderful speakers when we've just got going, but if anybody has to go, we are recording and you can catch up later, of course.
Yeah, just in my own research, I uncovered 2,600 artists, over 2,600 who exhibited with Women's International, and they were known at the time during the 20th century, but there's not scholarship or biographies about them now. Do you think curators are put off by the fact that there's not enough information out there? and therefore they don't exhibit them because there's not enough work by them and there's not enough information about them.
Well, I can tell you quite an interesting story about a case study about that, is that I think the trouble with museums is that they have to justify that there'll be enough footfall. And so if an artist isn't known, then they're not going to want to do the exhibition. Of course, that's often the case with women artists, particularly if the research hasn't been done. But certainly when I was curating Winifred Nights at Dulwich Picture Gallery, the exhibition before Winifred Nights was Eric Ravilius, that was a huge success. And they had a survey company in to ask questions to the visiting public of Ravilius why they'd come to Dulwich Picture Gallery. And they all had the same answer: because we love Ravilius. So then the trustees of Dulwich Picture Gallery said that they no longer could do the Winifred Nights exhibition because no one had heard of her and nobody would come. Finally, we managed to get it back on track for a much more limited few months. It was supposed to be on for 6 months. It was actually on for 3 in the end because of this problem. And actually, it was one of their best selling exhibitions. So I think that in a way, galleries ought to be a bit braver. And I think also people love the sense of discovery, but definitely it is very difficult to get artists that aren't household names, that aren't names to the public. It's very difficult to get retrospectives of their exhibitions off the ground.
Yeah, and an interesting aside to the Ravilius story, of course, he had an incredibly talented wife, Tirza Garwood, who we have a tiny work in our exhibition, but you know, very talented both as the wood engraver and then later as a painter, and one of the many women who were sort of obscured by their husband's greater fame. Laura Knight, of course, is a counterpoint to that, but we have quite a few examples of that in the exhibition. And we also have contrary stories of women, you know, like Sonia Delany, who worked both with her husband and independently. And then next to her, a very lesser known woman artist next to the very well-known Delany, an artist from our own collection called Lena Pilico, doing a very kind of modern abstract scarf design, probably in the 20s or 30s. And, you know, she was the first woman artist that we gave a solo exhibition to in 1927. Well, I should say she was married to the then president of BENRI, but I'm sure it was on talent alone. But these stories of the husband and wife artists and how that dynamic works, that's quite a sort of subcurrent of the current show, and I know it often comes into these histories as well. But sorry, I take us slightly off the thing there. Do we have any other questions from our audience? Craig is asking, how important was Swallow's book on women artists? Anyone want to tackle that question? Okay, so moving on. Thanks from Alexander Lazar. Is there any interest in research on underrepresented Central European movements and feminisms, she asks. From either of you?
What was the question? Is there any
interest in research on underrepresented Central European movements and feminisms, i.e. outside the Anglo-American canon?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I'm afraid
Yeah,
I'm not qualified to answer, but I'm sure that everywhere, this is the other problem, that the Western canon is more research than other canons, and I'm sure that there is work, but I can't answer that question because I'm not qualified to.
Okay, and Craig comments that Museum Such, if that's the correct pronunciation, does this work. So I'm conscious that we are going over time there. So I think perhaps we'll draw to a close here, although I feel we've just kind of started really, and we should really have had a much longer event. So maybe we'll have a part 2 at some point in the future and see how things have evolved since our discussion. And you know, keep up the fantastic work that you both do with your collections. And yeah, hugely recommend to everyone seeing the work in both those collections as well. And thank you so much to Una for being co-host and putting all those great questions. And thank you to our audience. Unfortunately, Rebecca Birrell can't be with us on Wednesday. We will do her talk later in the year, but I hope you will all join us next week for Marianne Manchio's talk on women and abstraction, which I'm sure will be equally fascinating. And many thanks from the audience to you all as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.